On May 28th, 2024, Harvest Moon Save the Homeland's all-ending speedrun was completed in 5 hours, 59 minutes, and 38 seconds. That's every single one of the game's 9 alternate endings completed back to back to back to back to back in under 6 hours. Now, for those of you who've played this charming farm sim, you might wonder, what sorcery could make this possible? And that's what I want to talk about today. If you're new here, then welcome. This is Harvest Stories, where we celebrate the Harvest Moon and Story of Seasons games and those of us loony enough to speedrun them. Today, we'll explore the history of a certain trick involving a certain unsuspecting farm animal, some of the players and glitches that led to its discovery, and how you too can use it in your own Save the Homeland playthrough if you want to have a little fun with it. On September 27th, 2014, Crazy Berserker posted a video showcasing a glitch he'd discovered in Save the Homeland. He showed that by whistling for the horse, then opening the quick tool menu with the R2 button with a certain timing just as the horse hopped the fence, you could get it into some kind of strange, glitchy state. The horse lost its collision, so he could walk right through it. But more importantly, by riding the now glitched horse into certain pieces of collision, he was able to increase his height, levitating off the ground. In a follow-up video posted on October 6, 2014, he showed that this technique could be used to get fully out of bounds. Now with this, Crazy Berserker had discovered the first real glitch in Save the Homeland. Now, no one would really do any Save the Homeland speedruns until a few years after that. When I first got into the game in 2017, 2018, I spent quite a while messing around with the horse levitation glitch, theory crafting with some other runners. See, when you dismount the horse, you'll fall until you hit a floor, but out of bounds, there's very little collision aside from just a thin edge of standable area just outside the map. So dismounting too far from the map means you'll just fall forever into the void. Early on, it was theorized that there could be some hidden loading zones, areas, or maybe even cutscene triggers hidden out of bounds. And there is some precedent for this idea in other games, such as Okami, where speedrunners can actually clip out of bounds and fall into areas that they're not supposed to be able to access yet. But even to this day, we've sadly been unable to find any such application of horse out of bounds in Save the Homeland. So despite how obviously game-breaking this glitch seemed to be, it was relegated to the cool but useless pile in the dustbin of speed history. So, if we couldn't use the out of bounds glitch to skip certain parts of an ending, what other time-saving exploits could we look for? Well, since the main point of Save the Homeland is just raising the affection of certain villagers to trigger the various cutscenes for their event paths, it'd be pretty big if we could discover an affection spam. Now, one of the easiest and most well-known spams in Harvest Moon is, of course, the Karen dog spam in HM64, where you can quite literally just repeatedly show Karen your dog and max her affection in a matter of minutes. Now, the dog in Save the Homeland can be shown to villagers for a small affection boost, but it doesn't work as a spam on any of them. However, there is one other farm animal that can be held in the player's hands, the chicken. But unlike the dog, chickens actually can't be taken off the farm and Save the Homeland. If you approach the path to town while holding a chicken, a little warning text box will appear and the game will forcibly walk you back towards the farm. No matter how you try and squeeze past it, this barrier seems to stop you from showing the chicken to any villagers since they never come to your farm except for certain cutscenes. But what would happen if you somehow could get the chicken off the farm? In February 2019, Desert Penguin did speculate on a rather convoluted method to do it by exploiting the part-time work mechanic at the Brownie Farm. On any non-rainy day that the Brownie Farm is open, you can offer to do part-time work for Bob, and he'll pay you to brush, feed, and milk the animals in his pasture. Now, as soon as you exit the pasture area while in this part-time work state, Bob will appear and ask you if you're finished, then pay you for your services. But if you wait in the pasture area until 5 p.m. while in this state, then when the clock strikes 5, you'll automatically be warped outside the pasture to this encounter with Bob. Now, using cheats, Desert found that this warp trigger only activates at exactly 5 p.m. So if you could somehow keep the warp from triggering for just a single in-game minute, maybe by interrupting or delaying it with another action, Desert hypothesized that it might remain active. Now, in that case, theoretically, it might activate the very next time the clock struck 5. And if you could grab a chicken before that, you might be able to use it to basically warp the chicken off the farm. The problem is, even if you skip the 5 p.m. warp, as soon as you left the pasture to go grab a chicken, Bob would end the part-time work anyway. So Desert settled on the following hypothetical method. First, start the part-time work. Then wait until 5 p.m. and interrupt the warp somehow. Maybe by entering Bob's barn or doing something with one of the animals just as the clock's about to hit 5 p.m. Now, having skipped and stored the 5 p.m. warp, wait inside the pasture area until 6 a.m. the next morning, at which time the game always warps you back to your own house to start the next day. Now this way, you can store the warp and successfully leave the pasture without encountering Bob. Back on your own farm, pick up a chicken and wait until 5 p.m. Assuming that the stored warp trigger worked the way we thought it did, then at this time, it would theoretically take you from your own farm up to the brownie farm while still holding the chicken. Now, not only was this method convoluted, but it was also incredibly slow. And on top of that, there was no known way to interrupt the initial 5 p.m. warp. Still, using cheats to manually skip over the 5 p.m. trigger, Desert showed on February 28, 2019, that this method did in fact work in getting the chicken off the farm. But the million-dollar question was, what use was it? What happened when you showed the chicken to a villager? That's right, the chicken proved to be a viable spam. Every time you showed it to a villager, they would get +2 affection. Now, at first, he only tested it on Joe and Kurt, but he suspected that it would work with everyone. Unfortunately, there was still no known way to interrupt or delay the 5 p.m. warp without cheats, and not a lot of obvious options for doing so. Despite various attempts at the time, we sadly never made it work, but it still proved for the first time the existence of a spam in Save the Homeland, one that could be useful if a different method was ever found to get the chicken off the farm. So as game-breaking as Desert's discovery was, the idea of the chicken spam kind of went by the wayside for a while. Save the Homeland isn't the most popular speed game, even within the Harvest Moon speedrunning community, so no one was really actively looking into it. Starting in January 2024, I came back to the game after a long hiatus, and slowly worked on each ending individually to improve my times. After I'd finished with my grind, I was still really enjoying the game, so in early March, I spent some late nights hunting for anything I could find that might prove to be a useful glitch. Keeping me company during these sessions was notorious HMSR glitch hunter Nico, who was just the sounding board I needed as I tested various ideas. At first, I was just messing around with random things, like maybe item duplication, or stuff with the horse out of bounds. But eventually, I set my sights on getting the chicken off the farm. I started with the Brownie Farm part-time work strategy, but after trying everything I could to interrupt the 5 p.m. warp without cheats, I concluded that it was either impossible or just way too precise. And anyway, as I said, it wasn't an ideal method to get the chicken off the farm in the first place, since it required such a lengthy and frankly YOLO sort of setup. So I decided to try and break through the barrier on the farm directly. I tried approaching it from different angles to try and maybe squeeze past it, but with no success. Now, Nico and I weren't sure if it was the loading zone itself that was blocking our exit, or if there was a distinct barrier of some sort that was surrounding the loading zone. Nico brought up the out-of-bounds glitch as a way to potentially go around this theoretical barrier, but I instantly replied that, well, out-of-bounds required the horse, which in my mind meant that it couldn't be used to get the chicken around the barrier, since you obviously can't hold the chicken while riding the horse at the same time. But then I had a different idea. I wondered if you could set the chicken down near the edge of the farm map, ride the horse out of bounds, then pick the chicken back up from out of bounds and carry it out of bounds with you. It seemed doable, and after a bit of testing, I found that it actually worked. But the real question was, what happened when you approached the loading zone from out of bounds? Well, sadly, it looked like a dead end. Even if you approached the loading zone from the wrong side, it would still trigger the warning text and push you back towards the farm. Now, sometimes it would even push you twice by forcing you into the middle of the loading zone, which would then trigger the warning again until you were fully back inside the farm area. Now, I thought I was out of options, but I noticed an interesting quirk. Sometimes, when you approach the loading zone from the opposite side in this way and triggered the warning text, it would push you towards the farm the first time, but it wouldn't trigger a second time, even though it looked like you were standing right in the middle of where the loading zone should be. I tried moving from that position, but any slight move I made would instantly trigger the warning text again and push me back towards the farm. So it was as if, as long as I stood still, I could safely come in contact with certain parts of the loading zone, albeit the game still seemed to know that I was holding the chicken and wouldn't actually trigger the load. In fact, I pretty much knew for sure I was inside the loading zone because as soon as I set the chicken down in this position, the load would instantly trigger and take me to town. Without the chicken, of course. So at that point, I just started trying stuff. Mainly, I wanted to see if I could interrupt this warning text box by pressing a different button. While you're holding the chicken in Save the Homeland, your actions are fairly limited since you can't whistle for your dog or your horse, you can't use a tool, and you can't cycle through your quick inventory menu. Now that command is normally mapped to R1, but while holding any item, R1 also happens to be the button that puts the item in your rucksack. And since the chicken can't be put in the rucksack, the game just plays a funny little sound effect to let you know that it won't work. And well, as luck would have it, that turned out to be the key. In the early morning hours of March 6th, 2024, after getting into position with the help of Crazy Berserker's Horse Out of Bounds glitch, and with Nico and Desert still feeding me ideas in the Discord, I had somehow gotten the chicken off the farm and saved the homeland. And it turns out, it was literally as simple as pressing R1. Now, we didn't know why it worked, and to be completely honest, we still don't. But for whatever reason, it seems like there are certain parts of the loading zone that can be safely touched while holding the chicken without triggering the warning text and the auto push towards the farm. And when in contact with those certain spots, all you have to do is press R1 and the game seems to ignore the chicken for just long enough that it'll take you, chicken and all, into town. Up until this point, STH speedruns had been completely glitchless, so this discovery was definitely something fresh. Now we had access to a powerful spam that could shave a ton of time off each individual ending, not to mention the daunting all endings category. One obvious problem, though, was that the setup I'd found required the horse in order to go out of bounds. Obtaining the horse in STH is kind of a long process, and would probably cost more time than the spam would save in most endings. So what we really needed was a way to use this R1 trick without going out of bounds, and it wasn't clear if that was possible. But after sharing my discovery and heading off to sleep, I awoke to find that the problem had already been solved. Desert had found Horseless chicken off the farm. The setup was a bit finicky, but more than doable, and Demo would later lab a variation of it that offered more consistency as well. By literally just inching ever so closely and carefully up to the loading zone in a very specific position, you could just press R1 and boom. In any case, this meant that all that was needed for chicken spam runs of any ending was the chicken itself and the R1 button. Even though I had just finished my STH grind a couple weeks earlier, I got right back on it with chicken spam runs. Now, I can't say that they're particularly glamorous. The runs involve exactly what it sounds like. You buy an egg from Ronald, incubate it, and use the hatched chick to spam whichever villager is needed for each ending. But at least for me personally, it breathed new life into an HM game that I'd grown fond of over the years. And my main curiosity was really just how much time it could save in all endings, which for me was the real holy grail of STH speedrunning. During my earlier grind, I'd managed to complete all endings in just over 9 hours, a physically exhausting feat to say the least. So I was quite satisfied when I was able to shave more than 3 hours off that time using chicken spam, and I'm sure there'll be more time to be saved in the future. Okay, so for those of you who might be interested in trying this glitch yourself, I'll give a quick rundown. Now first, you're going to want to grab a chicken, any chicken or chick, it doesn't matter whether it's matured yet, and approach the path to town. Approach the hill to the right of the path, then turn your camera all the way to the left until it gets blocked by the hill behind you. Then, hold up so that you'll walk into the hill in front of you, and eventually you'll get stuck on a part of the collision. Now from there, tap down carefully just a few times until you get your boot nearly touching the little smudge on the ground in front of you. Tap down left carefully, then straight down just a little further, then straight left until you're roughly in this position. Now from here, just press R1. And if you're in the right spot, you'll enter the town with a chicken. Now, if at any point you trigger the warning text, you obviously got too close to the barrier. And if you press R1 and nothing happens, then you're too far away. And it's quite a precise spot, so it might take some finagling, but it's definitely not too difficult with some practice. So from here, what can we do? Well, first of all, you can't set the chicken down outside the farm or the game will crash. Now, the only exception is the brownie farm pasture, where there's kind of a funny visual glitch. If you bring the chicken there, the game will get confused and seems to link the chicken to one of Bob's horses. So it actually will let you set it down there unless you're holding the 6th chicken in your coop, in which case the game will crash, since Bob only has 5 horses. Now, aside from that, you can show it to any villager as many times as you want in a single day. You can't enter any buildings with the chicken though, so they'll have to be outside. Now, if it's your first time talking to them that year, they'll first get their introduction boost, anywhere from +8 to +14, depending on the villager, and every time you show them after that, it'll be +2. Max affection is 255, so obviously you have to spam them quite a few times before you hit that number, but most of the endings don't require that much affection anyway. Now, there is one unfortunate exception, and that's Kurt. Despite what Desert initially thought, the spam actually only works for him if he's below 21 total affection, and then it just stops working. However, it is an infinite spam on his birthday, Winter 10. On that day, it's a +4 spam until he hits 21 affection, and from 21 and above, it's a +5 spam. Now, if you trigger any cutscenes while carrying the chicken, it'll immediately get teleported back to the coop. That's one way to safely get rid of it without crashing the game, because otherwise you have to very carefully carry it back to the farm yourself once you've done any spamming. Now, unfortunately, if you enter and leave the brownie farm pasture, the chicken becomes invisible, and you can't set this invisible chicken back down at your farm, or the game will crash. In this situation, you can either trigger a cutscene to get rid of it, or you can leave it at the brownie farm pasture and then either sell it or let it die. In any case, I hope you enjoyed today's journey into some of the glitches and oddities of this much underappreciated classic Harvest Moon game. I know it's a little niche, but I honestly just wanted to share this story and give some recognition to Crazy Berserker and his discovery from so long ago, since it really was the missing piece that made this breakthrough possible. And of course, without Desert's research demonstrating the existence of chicken spam in the first place, I never would have even bothered to look into any of this. Now, if you need any help completing any of the endings in Save the Homeland, there's really not a whole lot of reliable resources online, but if there's interest, maybe I could do some formal guide videos in the future. But I'll link some of my notes in the description, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them below. And with that said, hope you're enjoying a relaxing and cozy fall with friends and family, and I hope to have more harvest stories to share with you soon. Later, Mooners.